Okay, today we are going over how compression affects a vocal. We are going to listen back to see how it affects the vocal and also visually see how it affects a vocal. And at the very end, we will go over the way that I use when compressing vocals. So to get started, I am using this vocal that I recorded from an artist that came over.
Ladies and gentlemen, debutantes and middlemen, venomous politicians injecting themselves with Ritalin. As I begin collecting this rainwater off grid, we no longer living in slave quarters.
That is the vocal. So the first one that we are starting with is fast attack and fast release. So I will be using Ableton's compressor, and I will be starting with a 6:1 ratio. And we will use peak instead of RMS. And we're going to go through a couple of these different views to see our compression. So let's get started. I'm going to bring this down to 0.05 milliseconds. And let's do 1.79 milliseconds. So I'm going to play this vocal back and slowly bring down the threshold.
Ladies and gentlemen, debutantes and middlemen, venomous politicians injecting themselves with Ritalin. As I begin.
Now I'm going to go drastic with the threshold so we can hear what it's doing. And when I was looking at that, we were having about -10 to -16 worth of reductions. So this is what I'm going to put in my output. But let's take a look one last time. We can also visually see it here and here.
Collecting this rainwater off grid. We no longer living in slave quarters. Ladies and gentlemen, debutantes and middlemen, venomous politicians inject.
So I'm trying to get the vocal back up to the original volume with the makeup gain. So I'm going to record this in. Okay, so next on the list is fast attack and slow release. So we're going to keep this fast attack and move this release down to 308 milliseconds. We're going to reset our threshold, reset our gain reduction.
Ladies and gentlemen, debutantes.
We're going to bring
they keep losing their mind, the signs of the times, the changing of the climates, the rebirth of Gregory.
Okay, we're going to record it to this track. So I'm going to go ahead and do these last two with the same process. Okay, now that we have these recorded in, we can go ahead and look at the waveforms themselves. I will do that by bringing the actual display of these waveforms up a little bit. So I will go down here and press 2.5 and we can take a look. So first thing we need to look at is fast attack and fast release. As you can see, this makes the overall waveform compressed.
Ladies and gentlemen, debutantes and middlemen, venomous.
There is an obvious distortion throughout the vocal. And that is because the attack and release time is so quick. So when the compressor is opening back up, it's trying to clamp back down on the next thing. And so if we compare this to our next one down, which is fast attack and slow release, you can see that our second one has a little bit more time to breathe. It's keeping the dynamics of the vocal throughout here. All right. So whenever anything is going above the threshold in this compressor setting, it's getting turned down, and then the compressor is taking a lot longer to release that compression over time. If something goes above that threshold within that time, it'll start to clamp down again before it releases. All right, let's move on to the next one. Slow attack, fast release. So with this one, we can see some visual differences already. So when we look at the start of the vocal here, this initial transient point is not getting attacked right away or turned down, which preserves some of your transients within your vocal. And this is the case because we have a slow attack time and a quick release. So you can really see it right here on this one. Now, hearing the difference between these may be very minute at the moment. That is until we start adding either doubles on top of your vocals and then adding more bus compression throughout your mix. And at that time, you can really start to hear the difference. So the last one we're looking at is slow attack and slow release. So this is the most visually distinct one besides the very top one. So we go from a heavily compressed vocal up here, and then we have two middle ones, and then this one down here, it's almost like the opposite of the first one. But the thing that we recognize right away is that this initial transient of the vocal stays. So if we look at the original, right there, it stays. Right here, it stays. And this is what's happening with the slow attack time settings. Right there, and then right there. When we have a fast attack, you can see that these transients are getting clipped off throughout, like this one. Now, we know what these do now. So the point is, how do we get a compressor to work with your vocals in the music that you're doing? Well, for the style of music that I do, which is rap, hip hop, so what I tend to like to do to find my compression settings for this style of vocal is what they used to do in the old day, which was like math. So I will take 60,000, which I believe this is 60,000 milliseconds in a, I think that's what it is. I'll correct myself in editing if I'm wrong. And then I'll divide it by our BPM, which is 81 BPM right now. And if I remember correctly, I believe this gives us the overall milliseconds of the bar. Then we divide this by 4. These numbers will give us options to use in our compression. So I see 46 here, I see 92, and I will use this on my release time. And I'll get somewhere close to it because, you know, sometimes the style of music, the vocalist will either be behind the beat or be in front of the beat, depending on the track. So I will do 95. And let's see where else our attack time delay. 11, 5.7. So let's try 5.7. And we'll listen back to the vocal one last time.
Debutantes and middlemen, venomous politicians injecting themselves with Ritalin as I begin collecting.
As you can visually see on the compressor, by the time that the transients are done, the compressor is letting go in enough time to release for the next part until the compressor clamps down again. So I'm going to take this one and record this last one in. So now let's take this back up and compare it to our original. So I think one thing that we forgot to do is add a little bit of makeup gain. So I'll add a little bit here. As you can see, we are reducing the dynamic range of this second vocal now. And we still got to do a little bit of work on some of these parts, like here. And probably right here. And the beginning as well, for sure, this initial note. You can see we are reducing the dynamic range of this second vocal, even if it may be slightly. So you can definitely see that right here and right here. Now, in a track, I would go through multiple stages of compression, and this is definitely a higher ratio. And so I may go down right there, and then throughout the tracks, I would add multiple levels of compression. So in that case, if I were to do something like this would be multiple stages in a way. So now if we take a look at this, you can really see how multiple stages of compression is really leveling this vocal out, while also being more transparent. We're getting more overall perceived loudness because the dynamic range is reduced and we're bringing it up in volume. So the overall vocal is sounding louder.
Ladies and gentlemen, debutantes and middlemen, venomous politicians injecting themselves with Ritalin.
So this is what compression does to a vocal. I showed you a few different ways on how to go about listening to compression and visually looking at it from our different settings. And then I showed you a way to mathematically compress your vocal depending on your track, and then doing multiple stages of compression so you can get a louder and more full vocal. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.